Hello and welcome to the Brand Hunch podcast, where we explore ideas and hunches around how marketers are growing great brands. It's a look under the hood at how much is marketing science and how much is built on a hunch. Today, my guest is Marissa Pace. If you're a sports fan, you might recognise her name as CMO at the Formula One, World Rugby and then Rugby Australia. There is not much she hasn't done in the marketing remit. From leading full strategic transformation projects to spearheading digital programs, developing global campaigns, and even broadcast initiatives for the Japan 2019 World Cup. She's recently had a huge career shift over to Guide Dogs as Chief Marketing and Philanthropy Officer, focused on marketing, fundraising and philanthropy to deliver on their 2030 strategy, which I'm excited to hear all about. Marissa, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. Great to be here.
So most of your career has been centred around sports. What drew you to sports in the first place and what kept you all those years?
Yeah, great question. So I don't know that it was so much of sport that drew me to my career path. It was actually Formula One. So as a young Canadian girl growing up in Montreal, we had a Formula One race, and I used to attend with my mother, of all people, for many years. And it was my lifelong ambition from a very early age. What do you want to be when you grow up? I want to work in Formula One. And so that's what drew me to sport in the end. It was a gateway to my career.
So take me back to the earlier days of Formula One, because now it's one of the most prestigious sports for a brand to be involved in. Has it always been that way, or why do you think it's been so successful with brands?
I think when I worked in Formula One, self-importantly, yes, it was as big as it could ever get. No one could ever replace the regime that sort of ran it when I was there. But, that's what you like to see when you think about yourself in that. I think if you had put a whiteboard up when I was in it and you'd said, what do you want to see from this brand, from this sport? And we were never allowed to call it a sport, actually. It was always an entertainment, something that was entertaining. We were never allowed, not in contracts, nowhere were we ever allowed to call it a sport. You'd look at, American involvement. You'd look at women. You'd look at getting involved in Asia, Eurasia, like just everything you dream of. And it's now happened. So how good is it?
Yeah, it's amazing. Even in terms of, I was looking at sort of Netflix offering, you've got, Drive to Survive, Full Swing, Breakpoint, even Sprint. They've catapulted the sport, which it very much is these days, into the cultural zeitgeist. It feels like a really brilliant strategy, and especially with high-end luxury or, super premium brands. Do you have any favourite brands yourself?
When I was in sport, probably a lot of the activations that were made possible by banks. So I was, dirty word, but, the cigarette money had long left when I was there. The banks, Santander, and a lot of the telephone companies had done a lot of great work in terms of what we could do. But I think the big difference now compared to then was that Formula One was based on exclusivity and making it super exclusive to the few that had access to this internal sanctum. And with Liberty, they just blew it up and they just opened it up. And I think that's a huge difference because people don't want to feel excluded anymore. Fans don't want to be left out in the cold. They want to be on the inner circle.
Absolutely. I was reading up that you pioneered F1's first digital and content marketing department, reporting directly into Bernie Ecclestone. I mean, how did that come about? Tell me about it.
So I was working for a television company at the time. It was a handheld TV before, our cell phones were what they are now. And he asked me to join his company to do what I did for him. And to me, that was kind of draw your own adventure, which was the digital strategy. At the time, they had no social media platforms. Formula1.com was on a 10-year-old infrastructure. It wasn't generating any revenue at all. And so that's what I was set out to do, and I kind of made that happen for myself. Dealing with Mr. Ecclestone was a very interesting, challenge in my career. He's a very polarizing character, but I'm never one to shy away from some conflict, and I sort of took the bull by the horns and made it happen.
How incredible. What did you learn then that stayed with you through your career?
Unequivocal focus on commercial. So the revenue generation, everybody's always thinking big sports, big brands, big money. Wasn't the case at all. I showed up at Formula One offices in Knightsbridge. Day one, where's my team? Where's my budget? What team? What budget? You're here to make me money. You're not here to spend my money. Otherwise, I wouldn't have brought you in. So that was the philosophy. And taking that forward to everything I do now is that absolute focus on commercial returns of what I do.
So back in those early days of sort of the beginnings of social media, what were you measuring? I mean, you mentioned commercial outcomes, I imagine uplift in revenue and, top line numbers, but what was important then? And is it still important to you now?
We measured pretty simple metrics. The tools that we had then were not what we have now. Visitors, uniques. I remember the big stat, our milestone when we hit it was 50 million unique users on the website, which was huge. Interaction, dwell time, how long were people spending? When I came in, so again, social media was non-existent at Formula One. We had a Twitter feed, and it was basically an RSS feed of everything that came through the website, every article that was posted. And we would release 2 highlight videos on the website after every race. By the time I had left, I think we were up to 30 or 40 bespoke content videos. So you can imagine all those numbers were completely blown out of the water. And, we were measuring fan engagement. It was the early days before that was a hugely popular word, which it is now in sport. That's what we measured, fan engagement.
How have you honed your own commercial acumen over the years? Have you aligned yourself with CFOs? Have you self-taught? Have you done extra study? How have you sort of bettered yourself from that perspective?
I guess it's a bit of a self-learning piece. I worked for 3 billionaires. And again, the importance of understanding and knowing your numbers and making sure that you are selling that within the organization, it can't be understated. Aligning yourself with the CFOs, but also aligning yourselves, because not always are sales functions and marketing functions aligned. Aligning yourselves with your chief sales officer, your chief commercial officer, revenue officer, whatever title you've got in the organization is absolutely key.
And what have been some ways that you have managed to score sort of buy-in or, take senior leadership that maybe don't have a marketing background on the journey?
I think it's, one of the most important thing across all the organizations I've worked on is loyalty. Everybody understands loyalty because everyone's part of a loyalty program. And I think that that's that common element that I'll always try to bring forward into an organization, that the ELT or the senior executive, senior leaders will always understand who are our people. Who is that inner sanctum of people that if they were gone, they would no longer, we wouldn't exist as a business. And it's starting with that seed and taking it outwards.
So you moved from Formula One and you landed in rugby. How and why? And tell me about those early days over at rugby.
So I had a great stint in Formula One. Overall, from the television to working for Mr. E was 10 years, and I needed a break after it was over. Went back to Canada, spent some time with my mother, and I was based in Europe the whole time, so I hadn't lived in Canada in a long time. And the headhunters were calling, and they kept wanting to give me football roles, soccer roles. And I said, call me when you have something in rugby, because I'd played rugby as a young girl in high school and in university. And I never expected anybody to call me back, but they did. They called me with the chief marketing officer role at World Rugby in Dublin, and sight unseen, I was like, that's me. Bye.
Was it what you expected when you joined? What was the job to be done back when you started at World Rugby?
So the job to be done, they'd never had a chief marketing officer in the building, and there hadn't really been that focus on fans. There was a lot of focus on commercial, so that was great. They had a great commercial officer at the time that I aligned myself with, but they really didn't have that understanding, that intrinsic desire to speak to fans, because it was a large federation. So things like ticket sales that were challenging the promoters around the world, things like engaging audiences, things like growing women's campaigns, different segments. There wasn't really there, and we made a huge play on the content side. So we won a lot of awards for all the content we did in 2019 at the Rugby World Cup in Japan, as you mentioned. And so that was, I guess, again, that journey that I went on. It was all about getting fans.
And what were some of the biggest things you noticed, the difference between the sort of the track and the field?
Well, some of the things that weren't different were sort of the people, I guess. It's, traditionally older male audiences. It was, specific socioeconomic level. So that was very similar. I think in the sports world, one of the big differences on the rugby side was the grassroots element. There wasn't really a grassroots element to Formula One, as you can imagine. You need a lot of money to be playing in that sphere. And as much as we tried to do it with the education piece, F1 in schools, we just couldn't get there. So that was one of the big differences that we capitalized on.
Did the old school kind of boys club mentality, has it ever bothered you through your career in sporting and in, traditionally male-dominated sports? Has it bothered you, or have you seen it as an advantage?
Of course it bothers me. Where it bothers me is where I see people probably before my time who may have been female, who didn't necessarily progress, particularly in the world of sport, because, they went off, had kids, and then they were excluded from a lot of things. And that's just the reality of what happened in that time. That's probably what bothers me. As me personally, no, I've never let it. I've stood up to some pretty significantly imposing characters that are male and female. I got used to being the only woman in the boardroom, or the first woman in the boardroom, and you just get used to it. It's interesting because where I am now is completely different.
I bet. Has it shaped your focus or your beliefs around other women in leadership development and sort of, I guess, we stand on the shoulders of those that have gone before us? What's your approach to developing other women in leadership roles?
I have a lot of mentorship time set aside where I take a lot of young women in, through journeys, whether it's within the organization, whether it's people I've coached in the past, whether it's people that have worked with me in the past. I think it's very important because I, too, have stood on the shoulders of many, many people, men and women before me. And I think it's just, as a leader, it's important we pass that on. It's important that we don't keep it inside.
Absolutely. And you'd have so much to share, whether it's stories or experiences or strategies or, I think there's so much there that would be incredible for women coming up the ranks to learn from you. So switching over to rugby or women in rugby, while you were at World Rugby, you pioneered the Become Unstoppable campaign, which was all around empowering women in rugby. That must have been particularly special given that you grew up playing rugby. Tell me a bit about the campaign, where this sort of insight came from and what you delivered.
Yeah, that was a full circle moment for me because I was the girl who started a rugby team within the high school because they wouldn't let girls play with the boys team. And so, having the ability to bring a campaign like Become Unstoppable with my colleague at the time, who's now CEO of the Commonwealth Games, Katie Sadler. I mean, she's just a force of energy and vision. Together, we were able to bring that to, I think it was like 55 countries. So we provided assets, a really emotional video about a girl in India who was doing exactly what I did many years ago. It wasn't based on my life at all, but, just breaking barriers to do something that you really want to get done. So it's a full circle moment, and we really impacted a lot of lives, and it's now given such an incredible emphasis to women and girls in rugby and in sport. But in rugby, I'm not sure if you saw the recent World Cup in England, but just the most phenomenal results, full stadiums. And I feel like that was sort of, that was in existence when I was at World Rugby. So it was kind of the seed that was planted, which is really nice to see.
Yeah, although we've still got a long way to go, it's incredible to see the changes and the support behind women in professional sport.
Absolutely.
So you've led a lot of customer-related transformation projects, for example, ticket sales and experience. Do you think that customer experience should be sat within the remit and the role of the CMO? And I guess how interrelated do you see things like direct commercial ticket sales with the maybe more like brand-led, softer touch, marketing components?
Yeah, so the customer role is 80% of what I think of on a day-to-day basis. What is our, for us, it's donors at Guide Dogs, where I am now, but previously in sport, it was the fan. It's really 80% of what I think about and how they interact with us. Because at a time, especially today, you're constantly competing with other brands, not just other brands in your category, but beyond for experience. And especially with, I hate to raise it, but the cost of living, people don't have infinite wallets from a corporate level down to just the person that was me when I was going to the racetrack as a kid. We had to buy those tickets to get there. So you're competing with a lot of different companies. And so for me, the CMO's role is specifically to work out how that relationship gets developed between you and your customer.
How do you go about a ticketing strategy or working on the more maybe pointy ends of the 4 Ps of marketing? Where do you start?
The ticketing strategy, I ended up with quite a good amount of experience with through Formula One. That was a pure revenue play because, as I said, when I got there in the first instance, Mr. Eccleston didn't give me a budget. So the easiest, lowest hanging fruit to me was to terminate a partnership that we had on a sponsorship level, which was capped at a certain amount per year, and say, let's open the forum up and bring ticketing onto Formula1.com, which exploded, and we got, and within a few months we were at 4x revenue of what we were getting from sponsorship deals. So that was a pure revenue play. But then you bring in that experiential element, and it's that end-to-end journey, which is what we brought at Rugby Australia. It was making sure that the fan from ticket to getting home had a great experience. You have to remember, though, that in the sports world, that journey for them, that might be the ticketing side, but they're also tuning in and watching from home. So you have to think about your full, your broadcast experience and the whole package of the fan.
So you then moved over from Dublin to Rugby Australia. Tell me a bit about that move. Were you poached? How did that happen? And was it the same job to be done here? Were things sort of more progressed, or what was the landscape like?
It was a COVID story. So I landed here in March of 2020. Our Dublin office had just shut because of COVID. And the day that I landed, I think a couple of days later, Australia shut their borders. And so it was a decision of, do I go back? Do I stay? And I decided to stay because we were all remote anyway. And so when my time at World Rugby came to an end, I had decided that I couldn't go back to Dublin when COVID was over. And so I stayed here, and the then CEO at the time of Rugby Australia said, I hear you're coming out of World Rugby. Would you like to do the same thing for us? And I said, absolutely. And so it was a very similar remit, but much more of a focused market and much more of an emphasis on, commercial revenue, ticket sales, and really driving that dollar value from the sports market.
So you landed Australia, you take up this new job, you've sort of done something comparable and probably more progressed overseas. Where do you start in terms of understanding the landscape in which you play? What levers are you looking to pull earlier? Which ones do you leave for later?
I always start with a team, building the right people, getting the right people on the bus, as I like to say, and then figuring out where we're going afterwards. I think my team here now has heard me say that enough. It starts with great people. So that's the first lever that I'll always pull, and then to figure out where the commercial opportunities lie, what's undervalued from the organization. And, one thing that we don't do very well is market ourselves. So it's making sure that the people in the wider businesses are really aware of what it is that we are doing.
I read a great article just last week that was talking about the main role of a CMO these days is to marketing and, for broad organizational understanding of not as a cost center, but as a true commercial driver for any business, investing both short and long term.
I've been an advocate for that for so long, and I will say it until I'm blue in the face. When was the last time you experienced your own journey as a customer of your own products? And when was the last time that you made a marketing video about what your accomplishments are so that it can be sent, whether it's to your clients, whether it's internally, whether it's to your ELT or just your boss? It's a motivating factor as much as it is an informative piece.
So now all of these sort of amazing roles and big successful both campaigns and projects and, a lot of great revenue driving across different businesses. When you look back on your career, what are you most proud of? What kind of sticks out to you as like, I'm really glad I got to work on that?
I'm really glad I got to work in the rugby space. It's a real passion of mine. The women's campaign was a really big one for me. I built a huge amount of World Cup brands, so everything from France 2023 to the World Cup in 2021 in New Zealand. And that was a real eye-opening series of events that we sort of unlocked real passion from fans through the brand, which was nice to see on a global scale. It was nice to see it come to life. Something that I'm very, proud of is that I've really stayed true to my own values. And I know that sounds like, buzzwords and speak, but it is true. I've stayed true to my values. I've stayed passionate. I've stayed accessible. I've, just an average Canadian just trying to do my best in the marketing world. And I've made so many people from high-profile places become friends. I just came back from New Zealand fly fishing with some old Formula One friends that are many, many years senior to me that we've been fishing together for almost 15 years to, new friends in other spaces which you'd never ordinarily have been part of. So I feel like being true to my values and who I am is one of the things I'm most proud of.
I was reading up that you're an avid fly fisher and beekeeper, I believe.
Yes.
In senior marketing roles where the pace is relentless, have you chosen those hobbies deliberately for the sort of meditative stillness, or how have they come about?
I can't say I was ever still when I was beekeeping. Unfortunately, I haven't kept the practice up in Australia, but certainly fly fishing, I liken it to, yes, it is meditative, but I didn't choose it. It chose me. The people that were around me were all fly fisher people. But fly fishing to me is the ultimate place for reflection, but also connection.
I need to get those gumboots on and get out into the water. For 3 years there, you ran your own consultancy. How did that come about? And what did you learn, I guess, as a string in your bow for the subsequent roles that you've taken?
Yes, I did that in 2 different places. I did that after I left World Rugby and after I left Rugby Australia. And it's always a good time to pause and reflect on what it is you're best at and what people value in your skill set, and where, if you have the time, you can sort of hone those skills. I focused this past break on events and branding with various companies, which really brought me back to my origins. My very first job was in events, and it really highlighted what is passionate for me. And I was able to bring that forward into this new role that I'm in at Guide Dogs. So pretty interesting how that all plays out. If you can possibly take a break between different careers that you've had, different jobs, different high-profile roles, I can't recommend it enough. Also, you have to eat what you kill, and if you're not selling as well as doing, it's a real eye-opening moment for you.
I guess it's back to grassroots too, back to having no team, you're sort of working by yourself, you're pitching, you're working with customers maybe in roles that you have been in. I think it's maybe a good time to see things from the other side and go back to basics.
Definitely.
So now over to Guide Dogs. Your title, which is both Chief Marketing and Philanthropy Officer, is not a pairing that I see often. I'm curious to know if that was the role that was originally advertised, or did you shape it to fit your commercial nous? And then how do you balance the two in this new role? Tell me a bit about how it came about and why you joined.
So I didn't choose that role. It was the vision of the CEO, Dale Cleaver, to have someone running both the marketing and the philanthropy team. Because I'd never worked in not-for-profits before, I didn't realize how rare that is. Because now that I'm in the space for the last 4 months, when I meet people, they express what you have, which is, oh, I've never seen that before. That's interesting. To me, it's such a natural fit. When I was, always in the marketing side of things in sport, you did so much that was commercial. So much of it was sales. And sometimes it felt out of reach depending on who was running the commercial programs. And you just wanted to bring it in so that it was all under the same roof. So it's a really natural fit for me. And other not-for-profits, I couldn't recommend more to have a look at who's running your commercial team, who's running your marketing team, and think about how you bring those two functions together. It's been a real journey here. The team here knows that philanthropy hasn't really been a strong suit of mine. I've never worked in that space before. The marketing side is much, much more natural to me, much easier. But it is all, again, about a focus on customer. It is relationship building, and it is stewarding, and it is making sure that people follow a journey and that you try to get loyalty from your customers into the brand. At a company like Guide Dogs, it's got such great brand awareness and is such a strong brand, especially here in Australia. It's an easy thing to do.
I was going to ask you, I think, the charity sector is quite fragmented, and you've got some charity brands that are seen really well or seen as really quality charities and have been around a long time, and then others that have either been through questionable news, upheaval, or perhaps they're just small and don't have the budgets to invest in brand. I feel like Guide Dogs has stood the test of time. It does great work on the ground, but also it's quite a well-known brand. Most people in Australia would know Guide Dogs Association. Why do you think it stood the test of time? What ingredients do you think has served the brand well?
I think they've done a really great job recently with the transition from the old branding to the new brand, and to encapsulate more of what we do. So we aren't just a dogs business. We do assist people with low vision or blindness in the totality of their journey, whether it's from diagnosis or birth or wherever that happens in the phase of their life, to making sure assistive technologies are available, that we're helping them make things more accessible in their lives. It's a really full spectrum journey that I feel very lucky to be able to contribute to, because it's a space I knew nothing about 4 months ago. And now here I am contributing to the financial growth and the future sustainability of guide dogs. It's an incredible thing to be part of.
Tell me a little bit about the 2030 strategy. I know you've only just joined, so you might not have it off the top of your head, but what are some of the things that you hope to achieve over the next 4 to 5 years?
One of the components of that strategy that I'm particularly passionate about is the social awareness piece. It's making meaningful change in everyday lives to make things accessible and really change the views from government to society to everyday functions in Australian life, how we make it more accessible for people with low vision or blindness. It is unbelievable how many roadblocks and barriers that you wouldn't think of that need our support, our advocacy to push them forward. So we have a whole social change division focused on that, stopping things online. There's a recent trend, I guess you could call it, called the Blind Kid Challenge. And thankfully it didn't hit content creators here in Australia. It was mostly based out of the States. It was making fun of people with blindness. You had to pretend that your child had low vision or blindness, and they would imitate in order to win, and I put that in brackets, win a portion of $100,000. It was all a complete joke. It was hate speech. And so the social change team and I jumped right into action. I called all of my contacts at, the old big social media companies to get the content taken down. And it's that kind of meaningful change that I want to bring about, and that's in the 2030 strategy.
Gosh, that's really confronting. How much of your time in this current role is spent thinking about the role of guide dogs versus the human impact versus the commercial outcomes and the sort of futuring of the brand? How do you almost sort of psychoanalyze yourself, but how do you sort of think about all the puzzle pieces coming together in a more meaningful organisation or a more sort of life-changing organisation?
At the Guide Dogs, everything we do centers around the client. So it's very easy to bring those puzzle pieces together. I spent the last 2 days with clients understanding all the meaningful things that we can do and we do in their lives to bring about change. And some of it is massive. So some of it is, making technology a bigger part of their life. Some of it is bringing really small components like tactiles into their microwave so that they can touch the numbers because they can't see the numbers. So bringing those different puzzle pieces together is quite easy and natural for me. I said to the CEO the other day, he said, you're working really well with the people in the company, but also externally. And I said, it's something that's always naturally been in me, but I don't think sport appreciated it quite as much, where we are a people organization. Not only am I focused on the loyalty for the donors and making sure that their customer journey works well, it's also all about the clients. As much as my legacy, I'd like to help bring those two worlds together.
How do you measure social impact over time?
Change, policy, contentment of clients, making sure that they feel heard and seen and that they're being included in everyday society, that we're changing behaviors and the way things exist in order to bring about improvements to their life.
You mentioned before that we're sort of living in this cost of living crisis and everyone's sort of feeling the crunch. What would you say to a potential donor as to why they should donate to Guide Dogs over somewhere else?
I gave an example the other day. I was speaking to a group of our major donors in a thank you program, and I said to them on their way in to this event, a couple of ordinary chores that you and I would take for granted. One of them could be using your phone, so using your handheld phone, answering your phone. So how can you lose the connection completely? So I feel like that's one of the most important things that from a donor perspective, yes, we can be doing all the big things on social awareness and changing the world, but there's also the small things that we're doing, and we're 90% donor funded. So all of those little things, and I sat down with a 90-year-old woman the other day, and she just couldn't use her telephone because she couldn't see the numbers. And we put little tactiles on her buttons so that she could feel them, and she understood where the 5 was because it had more tactile than the others. And all of a sudden, she just lit up because she was able to call out. And it's something that we take for granted. So from a donor perspective, it's the big, meaningful things change, but it's also the small things that we're looking after at Guide Dogs.
Yeah, life-changing. When you think about just the pure creativity part of marketing, so brand campaigns and, creating emotional content in whichever format, how much are you leaning into charitable norms and research in the charity sector versus your own experience in more, secular or non-philanthropic spaces? What's going to be your strategy for the creative moving forward?
It's always served me well. So the good thing is that I don't really know the charity / not-for-profit space. So I haven't really had a chance to lean into what's really worked well in there. Again, my philosophy is that we are in a time where people aren't considering their donation as I will give to guide dogs or I will give to someone else. It's in the broad spectrum of many things. I have a pot of money. What am I going to do with my money? So it's always served me. It's that emotional connection. It's building on the emotion and getting people to go, oh, that's really moved me. I need to help. And you know what? Donating is one way that people can help us, right? We also have options with volunteering. We have many other, you can become a puppy raiser. So there's lots of other avenues. Donation is just one of them.
How does community building support guide dogs as an organisation? How does it compare with building fan bases in sport? I imagine the challenge looks different, but perhaps you've got a combined sort of ethos or, belief system that you can work from?
It's funny. It's quite similar to sport, actually. The grassroots piece, if you think about, Saturday sport or Sunday sport, there's a lot of the grassroots happening, sausage sizzles. It's all brought to you by volunteers. My husband's a volunteer rugby coach. That's taken for granted in the sports community as I bring my kid to sport and someone else looks after them. Those are volunteers. Similar for us. So it's all grassroots. The other day, we had, I think, 35 people packing envelopes, Christmas envelopes, stuffing them with, thank you cards and calendars, for potential donors. And that is an amazing gift that those people are giving of their time. So it's very similar. It's grassroots. It's very, very similar.
Yeah. Where would you say you sit on the gut hunch versus data spectrum? It sounds like throughout your career you've had quite a commercially astute sort of almost data end, but when you talk about creativity and emotional resonance, I would imagine that's a bit more of a hunch. So how do you reconcile the two?
It's a great question. And the crux of your podcast name, the brand hunch. Look, I would say, and I'm never vanilla, but I'd say I sit in the middle of this. I think the numerical component of it is what makes that business case for you. And it's super important when you're selling into upper layers of ELT, the board, who might not have that touchy-feely understanding of marketing and the importance of that emotional element. So numbers always tell the truth. They never lie, right? If they're right, then you can't really escape the realities of what numbers bring. So I do rely heavily on metrics, but having worked in sport, having seen, the emotional element that a brand can bring someone, the pleasure, and especially at guide dogs, you've got to balance the two. It's a tricky balance, but you've got to balance the two. I lean some days on one side, some days on another side.
It's the spectrum of a marketer, right? There's some days where one's more important than the other and vice versa, and the sort of beauty of two coming together.
Exactly right.
Bit of a personal question. Your career's taken you literally around the world, from London to Dublin to now Australia. How have you gone about embedding yourself in a professional network from scratch and integrating into the local community?
Oh, that's a tough one. And I'm not sure I've done the best job of that, depending on where I've lived. I'd say London was great for networking, but terrible for my personal life. I really didn't get settled in that front at all. It was just fewer opportunities. I think you really have to put yourself out there. The mentoring piece as I went on, so when I moved to Dublin, the mentoring piece is a big one. When you make yourself available to volunteer at organizations that need, leadership and leaders to speak to other people, that really exposes you to new networks, which is great. Education, going through, various courses and classes and putting yourself out there. It's not a comfortable space for so many people. And I guess being around the sports environment for so long, I have. But the other thing is that, I've had global jobs. I've dealt with people around the world for so long. I've been coming to Australia for 20 years. So I've known people here. You really have to get the courage up to pick up the phone and call and say, hey, I'm here now. Can we meet for coffee? It's hard, but you just have to do it. Market yourself, right? That's what it's all about.
Back to the 101. You've lived both high performance sport and now social impact. Where do you feel most energized?
Oh, no question. No question. Social impact. Working at this not-for-profit organization really motivates you. You realize what you've taken for granted for so long. And I think sport has so much to learn from an accessibility and inclusion perspective. I've had to do a lot of courses, obviously, with the NDIS while I'm here and various courses along the way just to understand what it's like. And at the end of the day, at the end of all the sessions where, you might simulate where they put a blindfold on and you have to understand which one is your shampoo and which one is your conditioner, I can take my blindfold off. People are leaving this every day. My first week here, I got a letter from a client that was looking to attend the Lions series, so rugby. So my old world in my new world, and he was blind. And he was looking to try to get into the stadium at one of the particular Lions events. And he wanted to know from guide dogs if we knew of any way that he could get there accessibly. And I just thought, I'll look after this because no one was able to answer it. So I just texted my colleagues at Rugby Australia. They gave me the answers.
He chose the right person to ask.
It was just luck. It was my first week on the job. And he came back to me and said, thank you so much. I've been trying everyone. Nobody could get me an answer. And I thought, my goodness, here's a sports fan trying to get access to one of the biggest sporting events that we've seen this year in Australian shores, and nobody could give him an answer. How sad. Sport needs to focus on that accessibility piece in a big way. And I feel like that's something that I can help do while I'm here.
And conversely, what do you think that nonprofit can learn from sport?
Again, it's a focus on loyalty. Back to that fan engagement, that was such a buzzword while I was working in sport. And we need to bring that here. There's a juxtaposition of the importance of whether you're client side or whether you're donor side. And it doesn't feel like it should be so divorced to me. It's one and of the same. One enables the other. They can't exist without each other. And I think sport covers that. They paper over that barrier a lot better and create meaningful connection between sponsors and fans, or the events, promoters and fans. It's much more intertwined. And it's, again, something that I want to bring here is bringing that donor side and that client side together.
Thinking about loyalty as a lever, what would you say to a senior marketer that perhaps hasn't had a lot of experience building out loyalty programs or building out communities? Where should they start? And I guess what kind of things should they lean into, training or even internal data sources, to be able to understand their customer and that journey a bit better?
Place to start is look at yourself. Look at who's doing it best. Whose loyalty program are you committed to following? Because it's such a great loyalty program that you will only ever go to that brand for that particular thing. And we all have our favorites, whether it's an airline, supermarket, whoever's doing it well in our lives. That's a loyalty program. That's brand building loyalty program 101. So where to start? I would say look at who your favorites are, who's doing it right. And then, as you said, go into the source of your own data. If you have a commercial analyst or a business analyst, work with them to find out what percentage of your customers are return and map something out. Customer journeys are so much more advanced now, and there's so many more arms to them, and it's somebody's full-time job, whereas we were, back in the day, sketching them out on whiteboards. The vacancies in my team are all around that. It's customer journey.
So tell me a bit about customer journeys. I guess, what does a successful customer journey map look like, and what are some of the outcomes that you've seen from doing it well?
I guess the most successful customer journeys that you see are repeat users and multiples. For us, it's regular givers or major givers that give consistently. That's the big golden goal, I suppose, if we're looking at it that way. I think where you can do yourself the biggest favor, especially in the not-for-profit space, is not to look at it in any particular one sector. So we have a Gifts and Wills program, we have a major donors program, we have mass fundraising program. You have to look at it in the totality across all of those different verticals and bring them together. Because at the end of the day, you might have different personas in the customer journey, but you have to think of it as a total experience that you're providing. Again, that builds into the brand piece of everything.
Thinking back on your career, what are some interesting insights you've garnered from customer journey mapping that you would never have known if you hadn't mapped it out?
I suppose in Formula One, one of the biggest areas that we focused on was the youth. And early days in the onset, we didn't really cater for that at all. It was a real transformation on the digital side. So again, back to the social media pieces that we spoke to. But I launched the first F1 timing app, which was a completely customized, personalized journey for real diehard Formula One fans so that you could change the view of what you were watching. You could watch onboard cameras. You could put your favorite driver on board. This is all mainstream stuff now, but that was 15 years ago. It was huge. And the insights that we got from there to watch who was using it, younger audiences, and you'd see the numbers drop as gaming started to be more important. It was a real case study in what needed to happen to go forward. Unfortunately, I left and then the regime changed over to Liberty Media, so it was ripe for the picking that.
Which loyalty programs or brands are you loving?
Oh, it's funny. I've always been an Air Canada girl. I think they did their loyalty program the best in terms of rewards, in terms of concierge for super users, in terms of showing the value that you got, and I hate the term, but the surprise and delight moments where they gift you something when you're not expecting it. I don't really see that on the shores here. I've seen it a little bit with Virgin. So I suppose if I was to be brand loyal to somebody, I don't travel nearly as much anymore. I think the grocery chains have a lot to learn from how they do it in America or how they particularly do it in Canada. Again, I'll use a Canadian brand, Loblaws, who has a rewards program where you're making so much as you spend groceries. You're seeing your rewards grow and grow and grow. And you don't have to boost all the time. And you're not having to do all those things that the supermarket chains here are doing. So I think that there's a reset that needs to happen there because, at the moment, I'll go anywhere that it's, the price is better. I can't rely on my rewards program at the moment. So I'm just price shopping, which is not ideal.
My last question. What can we expect to see from Guide Dogs over the next 12 months?
More great connecting stories, more emotional elements to our marketing. I think we do an incredible job actually of making everything accessible, but there's a part of the donor that doesn't understand that piece. So that accessibility piece, why do I need this extra information? And it's really making sure that we teach people that, and that's part of that social awareness piece of why if you can't see what you're watching, then how else are we getting that emotional connection out of people? So it's that education piece. I think you'll be pleased to see in about 12 months' time a whole new rewards and loyalty program that we've got.
I would expect nothing less.
Yeah, I think. And hopefully some of my old past, getting some sports partnerships on board. We did something with the Newcastle Knights this year, but I'd love to see that expanded to NRL teams, rugby teams, the Matildas, Socceroos, much wider.
Incredible. Hey, I've had such an enjoyable conversation with you. I feel like I've learned a lot about the intersection of sports and non-profit land, which I didn't realize I needed to know. But now that I do, I'm glad that we've had this conversation. So thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Lindsay. This has been great.
My biggest takeaway from this chat was the importance and power of customer journey mapping and loyalty programs. For a long time, I thought loyalty programs are sort of the boring younger cousin of marketing, but listening to the commercial impact of knowing your customer and doubling down makes me want to explore it a whole lot more.